Welcome to Speak of the Devils, the premier podcast for Sun Devil football. I'm Brad Denny with 3TV.
And I'm Joe Healy with DevilsDigest.com.
All right, Joe, the season is officially over with the conclusion of the Sun Bowl. And if you were curious our thoughts on that game, you can check out our Untimed Down episode from last Friday. But that just means things are really, truly heating up. The offseason is in full swing, and that means the transfer portal is a bustling.
The floodgates are open. As of last Friday, the transfer portal is open for business. As we know, players from Arizona State and all across the country have been making their intentions known for several weeks now. There are even players that did so, early in the year, doing the whole play a couple games in red shirt before you transfer thing. But man, it is going. ASU already has a handful of commitments, several players that are on the outbound list into the transfer portal. Things are very different. If you don't know, with the portal this year, you just have the one portal window for 2 weeks in January. Closes on the 16th. You don't get a spring one. So things are pretty wild right now, and you have to figure over the next week and a half or so, it's going to get even wilder with these opportunities that players sometimes just can't really turn down, or at least they want to keep in consideration.
Of course, the transfer portal has been such a crucial element to ASU's resurgence and the big turnaround that Kenny Dillingham and staff have done over the last few years. And with so many outgoing guys exhausting their eligibility or heading into the NFL draft, this portal cycle is going to be absolutely crucial in laying the foundation for pretty much that second wave and where the Sun Devil program is going to go in 2026 and beyond. And so we're going to be breaking down some of the early action, some of the guys that are going elsewhere, but most importantly, who is coming to be a Sun Devil. Some big time names so far have entered that list, with more to come. And of course, it is a little bit interesting with the new college football calendar, but it is also, of course, the time that we pull off our annual season award spectacular. We're going to honor the best and, in some cases, not so best of what the 2025 season brought for the Sun Devils. But Joe, let's start things off with a quick news item. Of course, with Charlie Regal taking a mid-season leave of absence for medical reasons, Jack Nudo was elevated temporarily to the special teams coordinator role. Well, recently, especially after the amended contract that Kenny Dillingham received, that included a lot more resources for the assistant coaching staff and the program in general, it wasn't revealed that Jack Nudo will be the special teams coordinator, but he's going to get some help. There's going to, of course, after a few years ago where the NCAA got rid of that kind of archaic rule of just 10 on-field assistants. There's going to be some more bodies in that capacity. And actually, it's kind of a notable one for Jack Nudo getting some experience with a former NFL punter. Mike Cypher is going to be helped coach the specialist, which, a guy who's been doing it at the highest level. That's a pretty nice move.
Yeah, not too bad there. As we know, Nudo was on the staff for the entirety of the season, of course, to go over Charlie Regal when he stepped down due to the issues that he had this season. There were improvements. Obviously, the special teams were kind of a nightmare there. And on the topic of special teams, Brad Denny, as I'm sure you're thrilled about, we want ASU's special teams to improve beyond what Arizona alums have been doing in the NFL on special teams. I can only imagine your emotions watching that kick soar a little wide right for the Baltimore Ravens last night.
That fourth quarter took 15 years off of my life, but yes, I did enjoy seeing a Wildcat go wide right yet again, a time-honored tradition.
Yeah, that was absolutely nuts, and I was there for it. I don't mind that one bit. But yeah, so you get those two guys in there, and it's good to get an NFL caliber, NFL alum at punter, because that is an area where ASU obviously needs improvement. Though I am a firm believer that if you have a healthy Canyon Floyd out there, that he can get the job done. I feel like you can run with that. And then ASU, as we will talk about, certainly going to look to make some moves in the transfer portal at place kicker, especially as it pertains to special teams, because you do have Jesus Gomez exhausting his eligibility. There is at least one name that is already in the mix, which in my opinion would be a real good one if he comes to Tempe. So, we knew that this information was going to be coming through as far as basically solidifying the change at special teams. It wasn't certain that it was going to be essentially an internal hire with that ad from the outside. But, this is something that you trust Kenny Dillingham and what he's doing. And I know that special teams, it's a sore spot for all fans. And I know that an internal hire in that regard is something that a lot of fans may not want to hear, but it's something just to kind of let play out and see if it can improve.
course, taken over mid-season for a coaching change, whether it is like in this case like a medical leave of absence or dismissal or something along those lines. At that point of a season, it's really hard to kind of change the course of those units. Some improvements can be made, but by and large, you kind of are what you are. When you're 2/3 of a way through a season. So it'll be interesting now. Would they have a full off season with some additional help? Obviously, they're very cognizant of the fact that special teams were not up to snuff in 2025. So it'll be interesting to see, especially when spring ball, how these change, this coaching change, and of course any additional ads from the portal you all contribute to what happens with the Sun Devil special teams in 2026. Before we dive into some new Sun Devils, Joe, there's a rumor floating out there, and it just maybe it's just kind of the price of doing business. But tell our listeners and our viewers why they should not be worried about the Kenny cycle once again.
Well, news that hit the landscape early today about the Arizona Cardinals relieving their head coach Gannon of his duties, and so I started to get quite a few text messages, I think late this morning, early afternoon, of don't tell me Kenny Dillingham is going to leave ASU for the Cardinals. So it's something that, again, with what we all experienced over the last month of time, it is very easy to fall back into that trap of any possible opening that you could in any way, shape, or form connect Kenny Dillingham to. Then you got to be very paranoid about it. Now, obviously, at the NFL level, that though that doesn't really seem like Kenny's style, coaching professional athletes as much as it is mentoring young men. If there were to be one job that maybe could catch his attention, you'd have to imagine it would be the Arizona Cardinals, of course. But there's been nothing through any measures of rumors or commentary or anything that are taking that possibility seriously. Now it is just kind of drummed up by conjecture and conspiracy theories and just that good old battered Sun Devil fan syndrome that is basically an offshoot of Murphy's Law, where everything can go wrong for the Sun Devils if the possibility is there. So as surprising as it would have been for him to leave for another head coaching job at the collegiate level, it would be like the shocker of all shockers for him to leave for the NFL level. And once again, I just feel like that there are a lot of college coaches that as we know, it is not a seamless transition to go from college to the NFL or vice versa. We learned that lesson the hard way here in Tempe. But it just doesn't seem like the NFL level is what Kenny Dillingham would want, just given his personality. And obviously so much back and forth and the negotiations with the new contract or amended contract, just so much has gone on in the last several weeks that, again, you can never rule anything out. But this would be, again, the shocker of all shockers if a change were made.
I do think if Kenny's tenure does end with him leaving for another job at some point, it's going to probably be, I would say, at this point to the NFL. And I do think the Cardinals may be the most likely, but zero. We're closing that door. But if this is 5 years from now, after the whoever the Cardinals drum up, in this cycle gets fired, maybe 5 years down the road if Kenny is able to accomplish some things. But yeah, I do still think Kenny's in this for the long haul. But yeah, it is kind of interesting. Just kind of as you said, speaks to the kind of mindset, the batter fan syndrome of Sun Devil fans that any job now, not just college. It's how about the pros? Maybe Kenny to the Cleveland Browns. Why not? Let's
Throw.
Let's get
Saguaro High School or Dobson High School gets an opening. Maybe he takes this big step back to really activate the Mesa or Scottsdale Valleys. I don't know.
Yeah, let's get weird, but yeah, I think that's just interesting. But yeah, Kenny's in it for the long haul, and so yeah, and as we'll touch on here in just a moment, he and his staff are already pulling in some big time names and some very intriguing potential through the transfer portal. But before we dive into those five, as of this recording, let's maybe do a quick rundown of who's on their way out. There are now 20 Sun Devils that have, since I guess starting with Tate Romney, right after the regular season ended, have announced their intentions to enter the portal or have entered the portal. Of those 20, 4 would be considered starters. One other, Romney, would be considered guy in that 2 deep. So again, kind of, there's some notable names, but by and large, Joe, this has not been a crop that has been a big time, impactful loss. It's interesting to see like every, like a fifth string corner or something for ASU enters the portal. You see the U of A fans on Twitter. Oh, the exodus has begun. But it's just like it's something that every school deals with. There's roster churn. This was the case with the portal or before the portal as well. But we should say that, of that 20, only one, as of this recording on Monday night, has signed elsewhere, and that's cornerback Javen Robinson. He is now a Wisconsin Badger.
Yeah, that strikes as an interesting move. Of course, his trajectory started at Washington State, came to ASU, followed Brian Ward, and then now to Wisconsin. And Wisconsin is they've made some pickups in the transfer portal. They're doing a little bit of work there, but man, they have been a shell of their former selves. I mean, that used to be such a literal and figurative power program. I mean, you didn't want to play Wisconsin. It was similar to like playing Stanford in the Harbaugh days. You were just going to get beat up, and that's really not happening. And I mean, Luke Fickell, that's been such a. I am shocked that has not worked. I figured he was just going to. He had a rocket tied to his tail end with what he was doing at Cincinnati. So really mysterious what's going on in Wisconsin. So that's obviously a lateral or step down. It's certainly a step down at this point as far as just the program is concerned in the here and now. We don't know what the money situation's like, so that could be a step up. Who knows? I don't believe he had a great season last year, but he certainly would have been a returning starter with Keith Abney going to the NFL. So, kind of a curious deal there. But he found his home, and it's out of the Big 12, not an opponent ASU will have, barring some sort of bowl game situation. So the best to him, but there is some kind of curiousness to it, if you ask me.
Definitely. And so, we've run down, the especially through our course of our last Friday show, the number of guys that have jumped in so far. Now, since then, here are some new names. And it was kind of interesting. This happened right after, I think, about 15 minutes after we wrapped recording on Friday afternoon. A guy who impressed in the Sun Bowl, Tony Lewis and Kuba, the DB, he's jumping into the portal, one of the young, talented defensive backs in there. So that, I think, was a more of one of those kind of eyebrow raisers, kind of similar to the Zechariah Sample, Chris Johnson guy things, where it's not a guy in the too deep, but perhaps a younger guy that could have made some noise. Wide receiver Noble Johnson, a Clemson transfer from the past cycle, got hurt, was out all year, never was able to make an impact there. Sam Levitt, as we've long speculated, he made it official. There's been some kind of interesting movement on that front, and in terms of I was looking at one point like Kentucky might be the main player for him, but it looks like Kentucky has now been able to flip Kenny Minchie, the Nebraska or the Notre Dame quarterback who had committed to Nebraska. Now they flip him, so we'll see exactly where Sam Levitt ends when the musical chair game of quarterbacks ends. Raleek Brown, after declaring for the draft, then entering the portal, it looks like he might be sticking around the college level. Took a visit to Indiana recently when the recruiting services had a crystal ball prediction that he lands at Texas. And on a similar note, today's latest entry, this is one that has been long expected. Running back Kanye Udo, 1 year in Tempe, just really never materialized in any way that anybody thought.
Yeah, going from the top of that list, Tony Lewis and Kuba, as you mentioned, he got his most playing time in the Sun Bowl, had the interception, someone that came with some pretty decent fanfare. I think he was, or at least at one point was, a 4-star prospect, but someone, through those 2 years, with the exception of the bowl game, you just didn't really get too much time for ASU. And, it's interesting how these bowl games now, like, that's kind of the purpose of them, or one of the more significant purposes, I think, back to last year with Ty Thompson, the quarterback, from the Phoenix area. He was at Oregon and then Tulane. I remember seeing that he was going to get a start in the bowl games. I think Mensa had transferred from Tulane, and it was just openly talked about like, hey, I'm using this as an audition for the transfer portal. I don't think he actually ended up transferring, but it's interesting that it's just so wide out in the open, at least in that example. So that's something that, again, in these middle to low tier bowl games, that is a significant thing that you can witness there, especially when you have portal entries or NFL draft opt-outs or injuries, the whole combination that ASU had that resulted in a lot of players not playing in that game. So we'll see where he ends up. That's going to be an interesting one, to keep an eye on. Sam Levitt, not that there was any substance. There was just discussion board chatter like, hey, is it possible that he could maybe come back? There are a lot of quarterbacks in the portal, and obviously it was a possibility, but he did officially enter the portal. There are, some folks, and I think to a degree, justifiably so, feel a little burned that, you haven't really seen any parting thank yous for Arizona State. As you mentioned, there have been some dominoes regarding Levitt and his next stop. Texas Tech was supposed to be a strong suitor, and I would imagine a lot of Sun Devil fans, myself included, were really hoping that wasn't going to be his destination, because then you'd have to see him in person again next year. They got Brendan Sorsby from Cincinnati, and talked about Kentucky making some moves there. So maybe the clubhouse leader might be LSU. So ASU fans might have to go through that circumstance again. We shall see. Raleek Brown, yeah, kind of interesting there, where you've seen a lot of players in recent years, or since the advent of the transfer portal, where they'll do that double dip of like entering the draft and the portal at the same time. So to kind of stagger them out is a little interesting. I don't know if this is he didn't get a very good draft grade, if his prospects aren't as high as he would have thought. Not too sure. So we'll see what happens with that one. Kanye Udo, yeah, that one's, I guess, frustrating is the best way to describe it, because I was real fired up when he committed out of the transfer portal from Army, roughly this time last year. Like, he and Jesus Gomez were the two ones. I'm like, those are the guys that this team needs, because you need a kicker and you need someone to replace Cam Scadaboo. Now, lo and behold, of course, Raleek Brown was the one running for 1,000 yards, and not Udo or Kyson Brown for that matter. So it's unfortunate, because he looked good in some brief spells, especially that Mississippi State game, and some other flashes here and there. And obviously he ran for well over 1,000 yards in 2024 with Army, but he only has 1 year left of eligibility. So yeah, this one you could really see coming, even with Raleek Brown leaving. I figured maybe I'll give him a shot, but this could be one of those folks, maybe not, that is kind of a product of the one transfer portal window. Maybe this would have been one that, if there were a post-spring window, that he could have run out for the spring, see if he gets any sort of traction. If that didn't happen, then you can have that second transfer portal entry window, but that is not the case. But again, I think there's more behind the scenes, or more than we know about it, because he's a talented player. Just didn't get much action at all. And by the time it was all said and done, we were seeing true and redshirt freshmen getting action over him. So it would have been great to keep him around and just see if he could get that 1,000-yard potential back, because we know that anybody Sean Aguano puts his hands on, it's a guaranteed 1,000-yarder. But just don't think that was meant to be. So yeah, we'll see how that one ends up, and where he ends up, and how that progresses for him, because he's a talented player. It just didn't happen here.
All right, so those are the 20 Sun Devils, again, as of recording time, that have hopped in. A couple, or one, has found their destination. So it's going to be an active couple weeks, and of course, wish everybody well at whatever new stops they land at, and we'll certainly keep you updated in the coming days and weeks. But Joe, let's now spend some time on the 5 Sun Devils that have decided to, or the 5 new Sun Devils, I should say, that have decided to join the program through the transfer portal. As we record this on Tuesday night, 4 of the 5 have officially been signed and announced by the program. But this first guy hasn't yet, but it is expected soon, and was, in fact, the first domino to fall. We mentioned it a little bit on our Friday Untimed Down episode. And of course, with Sam Levitt on the way out, and some talented quarterbacks in the fold already, but some youngsters, you want to bring in a guy that perhaps still has a few years left, but also is you got some experience, and starting basically a full season in the SEC kind of checks that box. Quarterback Cutter Boley is coming over from Kentucky. He will be a redshirt sophomore in 2026. Now, this is a guy, a big dude, 6'5", 220 pounder. He took a redshirt in 2024. It was a consensus, I believe, 4-star prospect as a recruit coming out. This past season took over from took over for Zach Calzada in week 3. He went on to throw for over 2,100 yards, completing 66% of his passes, 15 scores, 12 picks, which we'll talk about here in a moment. Some big-time games. Had a 330-yard, 5-touchdown performance against Tennessee. A guy with of that stature, predictably a big-time arm, but can also run a little bit. I mean, then again, he's not going to be confused for a Sam Levitt or a Jeff Sims as a runner, but he is a guy that is not necessarily a statue back there. But I think the one thing that has caught a little, while the tools are very intriguing, a lot of Sun Devil fans happy about that. On the flip side, they're also a little bit worried about that double-digit interception total.
Yeah, there's quite a bit to break down here. And, first and foremost, this strikes as the one and only guy that they wanted. I mean, they were after him pretty much immediately. I have not seen any reports or any sort of commentary about ASU having much contact with other quarterbacks, that sort of thing. So this was someone that was definitely targeted. Of course, I believe Kenny Dillingham recruited him out of high school while Dillingham was at Oregon, if I'm not mistaken. could have been for Arizona State as well, depending on the point in Boley's career that he was being recruited by Dillingham. So some pros and some cons here, or at least some questionable things. Put it that way. First and foremost, yeah, we just got to talk about the interceptions. He had 12 picks last year. As of right now, only 4 FBS players in the country have or had more interceptions in 2025 than the 12 that he threw. There were a handful of other guys that had 12. He's not the only one. But again, he's like in the top 5, you could say, most interceptions thrown. I think that is certainly a sore spot for Sun Devil fans, given just how catastrophic turnovers were in the Territorial Cup game and essentially how they proved to be the deciding factor in ASU's loss to Duke in the Sun Bowl. So that is a very, very open wound. Now, that's not to say that can't be fixed. There's a young quarterback who played for a team in the state of California and threw double-digit interceptions as a youngster. And this year he walked away with the Heisman and looks like they're going to win the national championship. So these sort of improvements can happen. But it is something that I know a lot of fans are just going to be waiting until game day, waiting until the fall, waiting for the season to unfold, waiting for Big 12 schedule to really see if, where the improvements are. Because Jeff Sims came in, of course, with a reputation of turning the ball over. And you can't say that it got better. It was at best, it was, inconsistently bad, but the lows were low. So that's still a concern. Another thing that I think just is a little puzzling, it's not necessarily bad in any way, it's just a little puzzling, is the fact that he's a young quarterback, and you got Jake Fetty coming in. You got Cam Dyer there. So though there'll be a little bit of gap of eligibility between the two, I was just generally thinking that if ASU in the transfer portal, obviously we knew they were going to get a quarterback, but maybe like a junior senior type of thing, to where, again, you're not so close in eligibility to your 4-star signees that you've had from these last 2 classes, because with the transfer portal and college sports as they are, guys aren't really that patient. But if this is the best candidate, the best fit, the guy that's going to come to ASU, and most importantly, if he's the best that your money can get NIL wise without really selling out, then that's a good thing. He was a big time recruit, as you mentioned, 4-star guy. His final 5 were Florida State, Kentucky, Michigan, Penn State, and Tennessee. Those are some big-time programs. Also recruited heavily by Alabama, Miami, Notre Dame, Oregon, of course, as I mentioned. So this is a guy that out of high school had a lot of folks coming after him. He's played quite a bit. So this is a little different than Sam Levitt when he came over from Michigan State, where he played in a few games. And in the transfer portal, especially with quarterbacks, experience can be a blessing and a curse. Because if you have like a 4 or 5-star quarterback who didn't play for, say, 2 years, then you can always go back to that high school ranking and say, this is a 4 or 5-star guy. He hasn't played. He hasn't done anything wrong. He just hasn't had a chance. This guy's ready to explode. But if you have a 4 or 5-star guy who plays, gets experience, which is a good thing. But if it's not perfect, if there are turnovers involved, that sort of thing, then it's like, all right, maybe he's not that 4 or 5-star guy. We just talked about Raleek Brown a moment ago. People at USC probably aren't thinking that he was a 5-star guy when he was playing there, but he had a 5-star caliber season this year. So there's a lot that can go on if you relocate. So, again, this is not your top tier transfer portal quarterback. This is a guy that has some questions about him, but a lot of intrigue as well. And, let's look no further than a guy like Bo Nix and what Kenny Dillingham's tutelage did for him, his career, and his ball control. So that's what we're hoping to see here with Boley. Just really the worst thing that you could see is for him to, continue that dozen-plus interception scale, because that's going to lose you games that you otherwise shouldn't.
I really like this pickup. I think it's one of those kind of, not necessarily buy low, because I don't know if anybody's getting any kind of discounts on the portal quarterbacks these days. But when you look at the price tag that Sam Levitt's probably going to get at his next spot,
So
or
we get $5 million. That's
yeah,
wild.
Sorsby, Brendan Sorsby's going to be making more than Jackson Dart with the Giants. So that just really kind of shows you how the market for these quarterbacks has really kind of exploded. And good for them. Get what you can. But I think for ASU, you're not in that position where you're going to be throwing, $4 or $5 million at the quarterback position. So you're not going to get those guys. So you got to take a little harsher look. You got to try to find the value buys. And right now, I think with what we've seen with Kenny Dillingham, Marcus Rowe in terms of their quarterback development, I do think Jeff Sims got a little bit bad. I mean, he was by the end, I think he was, and once the offense kind of played to his strengths, You can't necessarily change the Tiger can't change his stripes, but I thought he became a pretty effective quarterback. And but of course, I think the big example here is the jump that Sam Levitt made, and also Bo Picks going to Bo Nix, first round draft pick. I think that right there is the template that you want to see, and perhaps the best case scenario, because Cutter Boley has NFL upside. He has the frame for it, the arm, and if with a couple of seasons, perhaps working with Kenny Dillingham and Marcus Arroyo in Tempe, and as we'll get to, some very intriguing weapons will be joining him as well. This could be a situation where it works, but of course, there's certainly no guarantee. And you're bringing in a 4-star in true freshman Jake Fetty, and in 27 you have another 4-star in Weston Nielsen lined up. Cam Dyer off that knee injury, unfortunately, didn't get to see any action in the Sun Bowl. Former 4-star as well. So I think there'll be some options if that turnover bug and that turnover issue isn't able to be washed out of the system. I think there's going to be some other options there. But yeah, I think for what ASU was probably able to offer in terms of this cycle, while not maybe perhaps hamstringing their ability to address other positions, and with so many departures, that's going to be a consideration. I think that it is a good high upside, potentially a low floor situation if those turnovers persist. But I think from as a redshirt freshman, doing what he did in the SEC, putting up those big numbers, and again, Kentucky's not that relative to the rest of the SEC, had a real rough year. The talent around him, not exactly. I think what's going to be commensurate with what he's going to have at ASU against the Big 12 competition. So I think it's a young quarterback, high upside, and as you mentioned, this is going to be a situation where this is a guy that they identified early. So there must be a lot of things that Kenny Dillingham really wants to that likes and wants to work with Cutter Boley going forward.
Yeah, and you'd have to imagine that character is one of those things. I just don't feel like this staff would have jumped all over this transfer opportunity if it was something they had character concerns about, or team-oriented concerns about, or anything like that could be a strike against him. So if the turnovers are really the main thing, maybe the only thing, then yeah, hopefully that magic that was worked with Bo Nix can be implemented here, because yeah, there is some really really high upside. I mean, physical size alone, I feel like you got to go back a good chunk of time, maybe to the Brock Osweiler, Stephen Threet days, when you had a guy at ASU who had this kind of size. And as you mentioned, he's got some mobility to him. There's one clip that's been circulating a lot of a pretty nice run that he had up along a sideline, so he can move. He's not, I love Andrew Walter, but he's not an Andrew Walter back there in the pocket. So again, we will see. And this the portal experience has been a little bit different. I think there might have been some Sun Devil fans that maybe thought ASU would go for those, maybe not the absolute upper tier ones, but some of the ones that are just kind of that maybe top 5, top 8 quarterbacks. But I agree wholeheartedly that when you have such a massive roster overhaul that ASU has, you just have to divide your resources. I don't even know if ASU has the capacity to put 4 or 5 million or anything close to that into any one individual player. But even if they did, I don't know that it would be a wise idea when you have to reload on a lot of different levels.
All right, so Cutter Boley was the first domino to fall, and then now shortly thereafter, the next day, ASU got a commitment from a wide receiver, a well-known wide receiver around these parts, because he's a local guy. Played his first 3 years of prep ball at Corona del Sol before transferring, playing his final year at IMG, and then just completed his true freshman season at Washington, where he made 24 catches for 238 yards and a score. And that's Raiden Vines Bright, 6'1", 200-pounder. So a very intriguing high upside weapon that could be joining a wide receiver group that is going to definitely be having a different look in 2026.
Yeah, that's like you said, homecoming for him between the time that he spent playing high school ball in Tempe. There's a picture that he posted from, I believe, about 15 years ago of him. He's going to be a sophomore, so he probably would have been like 4 or 5 years old wearing ASU gear and that sort of thing. So it's cool how that's come full circle. He was someone that was a decently rated recruit, especially like when he was in Arizona and among those, lists on the recruiting services. 24 catches as a true freshman. That is solid. That really is. And that's something to build upon. So he's someone that, we'll obviously go through the list here, that all things considered, as long as you don't lose anybody to the transfer portal on the roster that you have in tow, he's probably someone that's going to battle for maybe like a third or fourth receiver spot, just depending on, some of the returners and how they do and what else happens in the transfer portal. But someone that, again, can be a future piece of the puzzle for ASU. A talented high school player, did some good things as a freshman at Washington. This is a real solid pickup in my estimation.
All right, so the weapons continued that same day when running back David Abbott of Villanova making the jump up from the FCS level. Now you might say, hey, 6 foot, 225 pounder, FCS highly productive player at the FCS level coming up. Sounds familiar. But I wouldn't necessarily put those type of expectations. But he's going to be a junior in the 2026 season. In 2024, ran for 923 yards, 9 scores last year, just as shy of 700 yards and 6 scores. But when you look at that 6 foot, 225 pound frame, immediately just on jumping out, ASU's needed a kind of that big physical back. The red zone woes last year were pronounced, and whether it was Kanye Udo getting those chances and not being able to pound it in against Mississippi State, or just all year long, or some of the other backs, the Demarius Man Robinson and Jason Brown, who had great success in the Sun Bowl. Not exactly big guys that are profile as power backs. Kyson Brown, I think, has some of that ability, but not necessarily in that frame as well. So I think that this addition brings another interesting element to this evolving and reshaping Sunnyvale backfield.
Yeah, and some encouraging things there this year. Early in the season against Penn State, he had 53 yards on 10 carries. That's over 5 yards a carry. That's pretty solid. He had a pair of 3 touchdown games this year. As you mentioned, numbers a little bit better in 2024 versus 2025. So it's an interesting pickup because you figure with ASU and what they've been able to do with the running back position, between all the different guys going for 1,000 yards and everything with Scadaboo and just all that you can sell about Sean Aguano. I would imagine, again, kind of similar to the conversation about quarterback, that folks maybe thought once they saw that Raleek Brown entered the portal, or when he was going to enter the draft, basically assuming he's not going to be back, that ASU could really hit a home run, with a major player at running back. And it's possible they could still go for more. And there is some conversation about that, especially with Udo entering the transfer portal. But if he can be a power runner, we got to see those red zone issues get fixed. They got better as the season went on, but by no means was it a strength. So if this as a 225 pounder can be it, I'm just very curious to see if this is a guy that's being brought in to be a upper tier running back, or someone that lack of a better term, of a role player. You're expected to get Kyson Brown back, who of course was supposed to be the starter last year, not Raleek Brown. You got a guy like Jason Brown, whose stock is really high after that bowl game. You've got Man Robinson. You've got others that, you've got a pretty full list of things. You got Cardi Mack coming in as a 4-star true freshman. So a lot of bodies there. We'll see how it sorts out. This is an interesting one, but at running back, hard to fault this staff. Obviously Kanye Udo just did not work out tremendously here. But other than that, the track record's very, very good. So you're gonna trust them in their analyses.
Yeah, Sean Aguano, if he sees something in a player and wants to bring him in, you got to assume that there's at least something to work with. We'll see exactly how that transpires coming up in spring ball. The fourth commit, and who's also signed, cornerback Caleb Chester. He's coming over from the Texas Longhorns. He is going to be a redshirt freshman. Good size, 6'1", 180 pounder, former 3-star as a recruit, and he's from the Houston area. So that's Brian Carrington's bread and butter. So, of course, those Texas connections are going to fit in well in Tempe.
Yeah, I don't believe he played this year. Obviously, going to Texas is a big deal as a recruit. Offers from Texas A&M, Florida State, Oregon, LSU, Florida, Tennessee. So he's not just like a Texas guy who got that offer from Texas and nothing else and took that. He was highly sought after as a 3-star recruit. As you mentioned, good size there. ASU is in a position where they have to replace, gosh, what would it be now? Like 3 of their 4-ish top cornerbacks, things like that. Maybe 3 out of 4, 3 out of 5, something like that. So, we'll see how this pickup plays out. I think this is a position where you really hope that they can pull in some guys with some starting experience, and maybe this can be a depth player in a future piece. But he's got all eligibility, got a bit of upside. Again, like I was talking about a quarterback, where you can have players who played a few years and they might have been great recruits, but if they didn't do much in the years that they played, that can take a little bit of luster off of it. With a guy like this, hasn't got on the field, so you can still have all the optimism in the world. So good to get guys from Texas, from the state of Texas, and they need to refortify the cornerback position and multiple positions in the secondary. So again, one of presumably several pickups in the secondary and a good place to start.
And then the most recent signee, and this is the big one, and you saw some of the coaching staff and recruiting staff tweet out kind of fish related gifts out there because they were reeling in a big fish, and it was certainly no understatement there. Wide receiver Omarion Miller coming over from Colorado. He's going to likely have 2 seasons of eligibility left, of course, as he had an injury ravaged 2024 season. But last year, he was second team All Big 12, 45 catches, 808 yards, and 8 scores. 6'2", 210-pounder, a legit kind of 2027 draft prospect as well. This guy could be coming in, of course, the parallels there of a talented wide receiver coming over from Colorado to Tempe. You're going to obviously have those Jordan Tyson comparisons, but I think he comes in, probably as maybe the presumed wide receiver one for Cutter Boley and crew. And this is, I think, a substantial pickup for the Devils.
Yeah, this is huge. He was someone that was on my short list, like my wish list of the early portal entries, but that felt like a wish because this is a player that I figured would, be heavily pursued and compensated thusly by, one of the quote unquote blue bloods of college football. So for ASU to make this acquisition, that's a huge deal. I mean, when you look at the pieces, it is alluring for wide receivers, even though the wide receiver position as a unit was not great this year and left a lot to be desired. When you have a guy like Jordan Tyson, for all intents and purposes, pretty much a lock to be a first-round pick, maybe a lottery pick, and you have Hines Ward there. I mean, those are things that you can put together and really appeal to people. This is a very well-rounded receiver. You talked about the numbers. The size, 6'2", 210 pounds. He had 6 games with at least 80 yards this past season. And now, of players with at least 25 catches, he led the Big 12 in yards per catch at 18 even. He also ranked 18th nationally in yards per catch among players with at least 25 receptions. So he can catch the ball and get yardage, get receptions, get touchdowns. He can also stretch the field. He has experience. He's a known commodity. I mean, this right here, like that is a very big pickup, a very huge get for ASU. You combine him with Raiden Vines-Bright. If you can have Jalen Moss using that Sun Bowl to kind of catapult himself back into the mold that he had at Fresno State. You still got, Derek Eusebio around, Jared Hamilton. I mean, the things are starting to come together. And there are more wide receivers that this staff is heavily pursuing. I think they're very well aware that they need to refortify that position, not just at the top end, but depth across the board as well. But this is a absolute home run. Again, a guy that I thought was just going to be too rich for ASU's blood.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned it, especially with the need there, but they might not be done even after adding 2 very talented pieces there. Because here's a rundown of some folks that are at least that have taken or planning to publicly announce their intent to take a visit during this portal recruiting process to Arizona State. And wide receiver tops that list. One of the top ones remaining in the transfer portal is Reed Harris out of Boston College. Now he's a guy that brings. We talked about the physicality and the good size of Miller. Harris is 6'5", 220 pounds, excuse me. And, he was very productive this past season at Boston College, not a noted offensive powerhouse. So this could be another big time piece. Should he decide to join the Sun Devil program along with with Boley and the 2 wide receivers.
Yeah. And I mean, these are guys that are just realistically among the absolute best that you can get out of the transfer portal, at least as it pertains to who's available right now. According to On3, we didn't mention this before, Omarion Miller, the second best transfer portal wide receiver behind Cam Coleman. That's a big deal right there. And then if ASU were able to get Harris, he's, I believe, within the top 10 on most sites of portal wide receivers. So that would give you, that would be a huge pickup. Seems like ASU is doing well with that, at least as we're recording here Monday evening. So that would be, it almost feels like you're being a little selfish by wanting that paired with Miller. But man, that would be just a great way for ASU to do work in the transfer portal.
Another visit that has certainly got some fans intrigued. Defensive end Noah Carter, who has decided to leave Alabama And that might be a familiar name. He's a former Valley High School star here, an elite 2024 recruit as well. I do believe he has some other visits lined up with some other Power Four programs, but now perhaps we've seen it a number of times since Kenny got here. That in going back to Ralph Amsden's famous quote, ASU is the best second choice a lot of players can make. So perhaps Carter could be deciding after some of these visits that a homecoming is in his best interest.
Yeah, Centennial grad. He's the guy who signed with, Washington out of high school, but followed Kalen DeBoer to Alabama, and now he's leaving. He got some run there. That would be a very big pickup. This is one that is really near the top of my list, just because when you have these guys that are, Phoenix area, Maricopa County high school products, you want to be able to capitalize on bringing them back home. You lose your top 4 edge rushers from last year, at least at that position, with Watley and Dorba, Clayton Smith, Elijah O'Neal all being done, unless something were to come through the shoots on JUCO player eligibility, and Elijah O'Neal maybe get an extra year. I don't even know if that's possible anymore. So it just checks a lot of boxes where it's a position of need to refortify depth, a local guy, a talented guy from a big time program, just someone that, again, that would be a big, big boost for ASU to get.
All right, so what ASU has historically and typically gotten guys to the portal with multiple years of eligibility. Jesus Gomez, the star kicker from this past season, was not one of them. He was one of the rare kind of one and done. So that leaves an opening at kicker, and ASU is now in the mix for UCLA's Mateen Bagani, who a very accomplished, experienced kicker as well. So of course, we saw the value that Gomez brought to this team with a few game winners. I believe 3 conference special teams player of the week awards during the season as well. So obviously special teams, we talked about the importance and the kind of maybe the revamped, refreshed look in 2026. So that could be another pickup from a former Pac-12 compatriot.
And this is one that really appeals to me, and I sincerely hope ASU can make this one happen. He began his career at Cal in 2023 before playing at UCLA the last 2 years. For his career, 44 out of 53 on field goal attempts. That's 83%. He's never been below 80% in any one given year. That is pretty dang good. He had a long of 57 in 2024, a long of 54 last year. Never missed an extra point, 71 out of 71. So this is a guy, I mean, again, very noted big Jesus Gomez fan, and was from day one when he committed to ASU from Eastern Michigan. This is one that creates as much, if not maybe more, excitement, because, man, he's got the leg, he's got the accuracy. But again, these are players that are often worth their weight in NIL gold in the transfer portal when they have that sort of experience. So we will see. But, ASU doing some solid things there, and hopefully that restructuring of the special teams coaches and the addition that was made, though that's, more of a punter by trade, maybe that can help lock things up. That would be outstanding, because, again, this would check a box in a major way where you need to go get a kicker. Yours is gone. And this guy is not just a warm body out there by any stretch.
And so the last trio of players are all on the defensive side of the ball. And of course, with the defense is going to look a lot different in 2026 with such a veteran heavy look over the last couple of years. Safety Lyric Rawls from Kansas, cornerback Ashton Stamps from LSU, who I believe last year was among the SEC leaders in passes defended. And then linebacker Caden Marshall from Bowling Green are all either visiting or planning to visit the Sun Devils here shortly. I think all 3 could be tremendous additions. Me personally, I think Rawls could be a very, very intriguing player. But you mentioned earlier the need for a veteran corner as well. I think Stamps could definitely fit that box as well.
Yeah, I mean, in 2024, he had 50 tackles, 12 pass deflections. So someone that, hopefully ASU has better luck than the other LSU cornerback that they took a couple years ago. Played a little bit there. And those 3 defenders that you mentioned, those are all talented players. Even a guy like Caden Marshall, he's a true freshman. I think he played only in like 8 games, but he had 30 plus tackles as a freshman. Just someone that almost, just kind of statistically otherwise reminds maybe a little bit of a Jordan Crook. He's just a productive linebacker. So that would be someone that I think would be, really good for ASU to bring in. They have solid linebackers there, but if you bring in a younger guy who, as someone like Osiris Fiaseo is going to play in his last year, someone that can just kind of keep that next generation of Sun Devil linebackers going, So Stamps, Rawls, like all three of those would be wonderful pickups. So not going for roster length. I mean, ASU has to replace a great deal of its starting lineup and depth. But as it starts with the transfer portal in these first few days of its actual opening, ASU is going after some heavy hitters.
And I think there were maybe perhaps some questions or maybe skepticism after Kenny's amended deal that, oh, are they really going to have some, more NIL? Are they actually going to be a more serious player in the portal and not have to necessarily rely consistently on kind of those diamonds in the rough? And I think, especially the Miller signing alone really kind of speaks to that, getting one of the true elite players in this portal cycle, but they're just getting started. It was kind of a smaller portal class last season just because there was such a veteran heavy team. This year should be larger, so it'll be interesting to see and track over the coming days and weeks. And of course, we'll be with you on Friday with our Untimed Down to give you the latest there going forward. But now, Joe, it's time to turn the page and put an official end to the 2025 season with our annual season awards spectacular. We're going to run down the mostly best, but in some cases the worst or less best of what was the Sun Devils season. And let's start off with the play of the year. There's a lot of good plays, a lot of good moments. But Joe, what single play stood out most to you?
And this is always a fun challenge to do because play of the year, it can be a somewhat normal play that is greatly significant. It can be a sensational play that may not have the magnitude of that more normal play. So there are a few different ways that you can go. With me, it's a little bit more on like kind of the normal play. If you're to take it out of context and just see it happen, you probably wouldn't think much of it. But to me, it really kept ASU's season on track in the early going of the season, and that was Derek Eusebio's 61-yard reception at Baylor. I mean, you got to think of this the setting there. It was 3rd and 13 from the ASU 13. Just came after a sack midway through the fourth quarter. ASU hadn't trailed in the game up to that point, but they had just given up a score to go down 17-16. Had a pretty bad kick return, so they had the ball deep in their own territory. 3rd and long. Like this was just seeming like everything was about to unravel. ASU was going to lose the ball game. Get off to an 0-1 start in conference play, and the season was going to like that. When that ball was about to be snapped or when that play was about to be run, there was a lot going through a lot of folks' mind of, all right, this is where it gets really bad. And then that deep bomb from Levitt to Eusebio kept things alive. ASU ended up winning the game. So again, a long pass of a little over 60 yards, pretty generally impressive on most levels in any circumstance. But for me, what that represented, because if you don't get that first down there, I don't think ASU wins that game. If they don't win that game, that could have caused a slid that could have really, I mean, I know the season, generally speaking, of course, did not live up to expectations, but it could have been worse. And I think that had that play not been made, I think it would have been worse.
For me, I'm going with Prince Dorba's strip sack late in the game against TCU. Part of that just dominant fourth quarter where ASU's front decided that, quite simply, they're going to take over the game and they're going to win and they're going to throw TCU down. I still don't know exactly how it happened, but I thought, okay, he got to Hoover, sack, big moment. Then all of a sudden he had the ball. And, as part of that fourth quarter dominance in which I believe ASU had 3 turnovers forced and just allowed 2 yards to TCU. And that, I think, is a great way to close the game. And we saw those flashes of just dominance that this defense was able to do through a pretty good defensive year all told. But I actually still don't know how he did it, but glad he did. Let's move on now, Joe, to your uniform combo of the year.
So
Hat tip Cole Streeper.
There you go. Shout out to our good buddy Cole Streeper and whoever runs uniformity, of course. Cannot be the same person. There are too many mysteries involved. For me, I'll go with the throwback. The uniforms, the outcome of the game is always going to have an impact on the quality of the uniform, right? So I'm going to go with those throwbacks in 1975s that they ran out there against Texas Tech. Objectively, a very beautiful uniform, but getting a win over a top 10 team, that's going to be the icing on that cake.
Yeah, I think that's the easy call there. And I know some folks initially were pushing back that white at home. I mean, but man, that result was pretty beautiful, taking down a college football playoff team in the fashion in which they did. And I guess technically they were more cream than white. So there you have it. All right, Joe. What was your worst single moment of the year?
The worst. This is going to be maybe not what most would predict. But to me, it was kind of like an omen, and it was that touchdown pass that lost the Mississippi State game.
Hmm.
But I believe it was Javen Robinson, if I'm not mistaken, getting burned there after ASU had, gone up with the field goal. Because for me, that was kind of the moment that the magic of the 2024 season wore off. Because that sort of thing wasn't really happening too much. Now, granted, yes, in the Peach Bowl, there was a heartbreaking, close loss and all of that, and those sort of individual plays that were so heartbreaking. But that was just at such a high level. It was a college football playoff, and ASU were playing their tails off and fought like warriors in that game. Mississippi State game was just, an ugly game in the first half. ASU came back in the second half. Granted, of course, it wasn't a conference game. Every goal ASU had was still on the table after that loss. But to me, it was very, very humbling and sobering. Like, okay, yeah, if ASU is just kind of letting these miraculous plays happen for the other team that result in a loss, then maybe this season is not going to carry the same magic that the 2024 season carried. And sadly, that proved to be true. So it's kind of an omen of other things to come. There are a couple other directions I could have gone, but I remember feeling that in that moment. And there were some low points for sure, but that was just the one that really got to me.
That was my runner up because I thought that was kind of one of those things that like, oh wait, these are not the moments that this Sun Devil team, this Sun Devil culture allows to happen, and yet there we were. But for me, I went with the Jeff Sims fumble midway through the fourth quarter against U of A. Now it was of course an ugly, ugly offensive game, but ASU's defense was balling the hell out against the Wildcats. And midway through that fourth quarter was still a ball game, 16-7. ASU had finally gotten some offensive momentum against that good Arizona defense, drove down to about the 13-yard line, and then kind of the bad Jeff Sims experience reared its ugly head and fumbled that away, and the Wildcats went down to score a touchdown and put that game away. So not great. On the flip side, however, there were a lot of good moments for this 2025 season. Joe, what was your singular best moment?
When that, I don't know if you call it a Hail Mary, just that long pass miraculously hit the turf in the end zone against Texas Tech. And man, you watch those replays, see how close it was to being caught. But that was a game that became a nail biter, but ASU prevailed. And of course, at that point, you hadn't yet suffered those really bad injuries. Of course, Jordan Tyson would get hurt in that game, and that would affect the rest of his season. But after that win, that hope was back. That fire was back. You had the feeling that maybe this team does have that magic. Maybe that Mississippi State game didn't kill that magic. But in retrospect, obviously, it didn't quite work out that way. But for that moment of time, and I will have you all know that I was actually not in the stadium. I was in Las Vegas, Nevada, watching it in my hotel room. So you're welcome. I had some modified road curse of me being on the road ended up being a good thing there. But that moment was, again, you just put it in a capsule and think, okay, man, just beat a top 10 team that a lot of folks are thinking going to make a run to the playoff, which of course Texas Tech did. Didn't look so great doing it, but they did it. Didn't add up after that. That was the high point, and it fell its way off from there. But that moment was something special.
My best moment came a few minutes earlier in that same game, the 4th and 2 situation in which Sam Levitt found a hobbled Jordan Tyson for 33 yards, getting ASU on that final clutch drive well into field goal range, which they would rather later cap with a 1-yard Raleek Brown touchdown run to get that win. But to that point, you maybe thought a little bit like, okay, ASU has been doing well against one of these elite teams in the country, and is the dam going to break at some point? And you thought, okay, that fourth down, here's where it was a fun run for 3 3/4 of the game, but nope. ASU was still able to find a way to get it done, and Levitt to Tyson. What other combo would you have wanted to go to battle with? And those key moments, everybody in the stadium knew where that ball was going, and Jordan Tyson still made it happen for that huge game. So thought that was a cool moment there to on national stage to get that things done. I think these next two are pretty self-explanatory. Maybe we can go at the same time. What was your worst loss of the year and your best win of the year?
So my worst loss. There are a couple of candidates, and it may not be the one that some folks would think. For me, the worst
Oh,
loss is Houston. that game to me is what broke this team, broke this season, physically, emotionally. Like, things were really trending up. ASU had its chance to really be in the conversation to return to the Big 12 championship game. And that loss to Houston, which was just so aggravating because of how flat ASU was in the early going. And then just some really weird plays. That was the one that I think then that had that really ridiculous turnover by Levitt where the ball just kind of
Yeah.
went. Uh, that was just a really, really aggravating game. Like I said, it's that Mississippi State loss aggravating. Anytime you lose to Arizona, aggravating. But I just the Territorial Cup game I saw coming from a mile away, and so that was not a surprise. The Houston game was just incredibly frustrating, and like I said, I really feel like that is where the season fell off. And they kept things competitive and won some games down the stretch to stay within the realm of possibility for the Big 12 title game and that sort of thing. But you look back at it, and to me, that Houston game is just a big, big separation point for the year.
Interesting. I went with Arizona. Just I think obviously, even with that devastating loss and that kind of to a solid Houston, an ascendant Houston program, just the way in which ASU was just came out flat against Arizona and the fashion in which they lost the Territorial Cup. Up to that point, they had battled, they had found ways to win and weather the storms, the ups and downs, and still be in that mix. However slight to get returned to Arlington, but losing the game like that, it was just to me, I think, just the absolute kind of low point when everything kind of came to a head. On the flip side, I think best one's got to be Tech, right?
That's got to be that was the one. I mean, there were some the Baylor game would probably be the backup for me just because again that had critical importance with ASU just kind of righting the ship after that heartbreaking loss to Mississippi State. Like I said, would have been a couple weeks prior to that Baylor game. But yeah, there's nothing that compares on this with a top 10 win at home against a team that ended up winning the conference championship, and it ended up being the only regular season or the only loss that Texas Tech had up until that stinker it had against Oregon in the college football playoff. But yeah, that game was a big one for ASU for sure.
All right, so now we go to some of the surprises of the year, and these will be surprises in kind of the trend, category, not necessarily individual players. We'll get to those in a moment. Joe, what was your worst surprise of 2025?
So there, three of them. They're just things that we talked about a lot, and I'll narrow it down to two because the red zone issues, the deep red zone inside the 10 stuff, we talked about that like in the first month or so of the season, and that generally improved. So I'm going to give it as a tie. I'm going low hanging fruit, but I got to do it. I'm going to go with just how the special teams units, outside of, Jesus Gomez having his moments and, some punting moments by Kenyon Floyd, the special teams were just a nightmare throughout the season. And I got to throw in that whole deal with the first quarter touchdowns. ASU bracketed the season with a pair of first quarter touchdowns in the opener against NAU and the bowl game against Duke, nothing in between. And that did cause some losses. So for me, those are the biggest negative trends that ASU had this year.
Yeah, I'm going to go with special teams as the worst trend for all the reasons that we talked about ad nauseum. So I'll move on to my best surprise of the year, and for me, I think it was the depth stepping up, young guys stepping up. I thought my runner up was the pass rush. That we did have some expectations, but I really thought it came on strong. But overall, I mean, we saw ASU just get hit by so many injuries in so many key areas. But I think by and large, the depth was really, it's surprising in a good way in terms of stepping up. Boogie Wilson stepped in for Xavier Alford. That's some massive shoes to fill. And I think when he was out there healthy, acquitted himself very, very well. I thought Jeff Sims had his moments. Raleek Brown, of course, coming in as a guy maybe a third on the depth chart, second or third, and maybe a rotational type. But all of a sudden, comes an all conference back. And, some of the other positions as well on the defensive side of the offensive line battled some injuries as well. Wade Helton stepping up in key moments. So I thought overall, any team getting hit with a lot of injuries, you're not going to be as good and you're going to suffer. But I thought ASU's step back wasn't nearly as much as I thought it would be, given the amount and the severity of all the injury issues.
So for me, it was the continuation of just this incredible play from the running back position. Of course, mentored by the GOAT himself, Sean Aquano. If you would have told me a year ago today that Kyson Brown's going to miss the vast majority of the season, Kanye Udoh's not really going to add up to much. And of course, Cam Scadaboo is gone from the roster. I would have been very shocked to know that ASU would still have a first team all conference 1,000-yard rushing running back, of course, in Raleek Brown. And so kind of crunch the numbers. And this keeps up that tradition. If you take out 2020 because of the abbreviated schedule, you got to go back to 2008 was the last time that ASU did not have a 1,000 all-purpose yard running back. And so that is continued with what Raleek Brown did. So for ASU just to be able to, weather the storm of the loss of Kyson Brown, and it's not that Raleek Brown wasn't expected to be a contributor. I just don't think he was expected to be what he became. So for me, that is a really, really positive trend, positive surprise that even though you lose Kyson Brown, who's expected to be not only your starting running back, but he was supposed to be that guy. He was supposed to be that 1,000-yard back, and maybe he will be in 2026. But for ASU, again, to be able to weather that storm and have others that get involved, that wasn't at very high scales. But as far as some of the spurts we saw out of Jason Brown, out of Man Robinson, that sort of thing. So, again, the work that Sean Aguano, the entire offensive staff did, and just keeping that continuity on the ground despite the injuries they suffered at that position and elsewhere on offense, that to me is a really good thing to have seen.
All right, now we hit the back half of the awards. These are the big individual honors, starting with Homegrown Player of the Year. And Joe, the pool of prospective winners here, perhaps not as large as in previous years.
Yeah, that was interesting because in preparing for, making my selections, you look through the roster and the stats and think about guys that are from Arizona. It's like, man, that is very, very, very limited. So this might, I don't know, ruffle some feathers or people might disagree, but I'm going to go with punter Kenyon Floyd. Again, not a lot of options. And I get that the punting as a team was pretty terrible, but his numbers were actually better this year than last year by about a yard or so. He had more than a few games where he was really kicking well. I believe he was the one that threw the fake punt again against Colorado, if I'm not mistaken. So again, by no means is he going to go out there and win the Ray Guy Award. And there definitely were flaws, but I think, it was that other punter that ASU had that was really bringing things down and causing a lot of the groans and aches and pains of folks who were watching ASU special teams. So again, limited sample to work with, but I thought that Kenyon Floyd had a better season than a lot of folks give him credit for.
For me, I'm taking defensive end or defensive lineman Anthony Cooper. The first seventh-year player in program history, Unk, as the teammates called him, just because he's an old grizzled vet. But man, he came up with some big-time plays. Had that nice diving interception. Had a couple of sacks. Was a very instrumental rotational piece to that defensive line, and that front of the ASU defense was really good all year long. And he's been around. He had endured so much and battled through some major injuries and continued to come back and stay loyal to his hometown program. Played his ball on the west side of the valley. So it was good to see him, end his career and as a important and productive player on that defensive side of the ball. Joe, who is your disappointment of the year?
This may sound a little bit like sour grapes, but I'll justify it. And the answer is Sam Levitt. He did not progress on the field as was expected. He was a preseason Big 12 Offensive Player of the Year. He was a high-tier top 3 to 5 Heisman Trophy contender. ASU was not injured the entire season, nor was he. There was a good half of the season, if not more, and things just did not look great. But for me, it is more the off-the-field stuff. And it's stuff that maybe some people don't put stock into, but I do. It's ditching the team for the year-end banquet. It's, again, and I know that this is getting too much in the touchy feelings, and things might change when he makes his decision, but he entered the portal, and you know what? Like, you can be a good human being. You can do what your head coach does when anybody transfers and wish them well publicly, thank them publicly. ASU did so much more for Sam Levitt and his family than I think that he is acknowledging. So he's really ruffling some feathers. So A to Z, Sam Levitt to me is the biggest disappointment of the 2025 season.
Cosign. Yeah, I think that's the clear choice. You talk about all the off-field stuff and you look at the timing of when kind of the shopping of his services leaked out from his camp or was reported by On3. And but yeah, and even just on the field, he just didn't take the strides forward. And obviously, 2024 is a magical ride that'll be etched in Sun Devil history forever, unimpeachable. But just kind of following it up there, just given the high expectations that were placed upon him and all the hype, certainly very disappointing. Now, of course, it's good. I think his legacy is going to be interesting. And we'll see how that transpires over the coming years in terms of how he's remembered because he did a lot of good things and even off the field, donating his NIL proceeds to his teammates and stuff like that. So there's it's that mixed bag. It's complicated, but I think overall, when you look get to relative to the expectations and the hype coming in, he just kind of fell short more than anybody on that roster. But we'll see how he is able to kind of come back from this injury and wish him well and success at his next stop. On a more positive note, Joe, who is your newcomer of the year?
So this one, the options were somewhat limited because ASU didn't do as much in the transfer portal as it did the previous years. And if we were to go through the list, there were just more misses than hits in the transfer portal. But for me, I mean, Jesus Gomez saved ASU's tails on more than one occasion. He's the guy for me. Multiple-time Big 12 Special Teams Player of the Week, won multiple games with his foot. So he kind of kept things afloat when things were getting shaky there. And again, I'll repeat it that, it was a season that did not live up to anybody's expectations or standards, but it could have been worse. And his kicking was what helped keep it in the state that it ended up being.
I don't think any ASU fan had any doubt if ASU had gotten into range against this in the Sun Bowl that he's making that kick. He's sending that game to overtime. Just one of the most impactful kickers that we've seen at a program that's had its very good share of elite kickers. Joe, who is your breakout player of the year?
So for me, that was an interesting question. But the one that I landed on, feel confident with, is going to be Raleek Brown. He's somebody that the 5-star prospect, spent a couple years at USC, kind of a tweener between running back, wide receiver, had some decent numbers, but ended up leaving there. Just had a cup of coffee on the field in 2024 for ASU. Really just did not get out the blocks because of injury issues. And lo and behold, and again, not even a guy that was expected to be the starter, maybe like a 1 and 1A. I mean, he was definitely supposed to be a very key contributor this year, but I don't think anybody expected him to do what he did. That opening created by Kyson Brown's injury issues certainly was the catalyst, for him to have those opportunities, but going well over 1,000 yards, first team all conference. Now, ASU is the beneficiary and the victim of his success because obviously it helped on the field in 2025, but going out and rushing for all over 1,000 yards and showing that speed and being a first team all Big 12, that's probably a big reason why he's in the transfer portal looking at schools like Texas. So again, some up and some down there. But if we're looking at it, objectively, he's someone that if you look at what I thought a player would do in the preseason and when they ended up doing, he's right there at the top of the list as someone that far surpassed and exceeded any expectations I could have given him.
My pick, cornerback Keith Abney. And I was high on him all offseason long and really loved what I saw starting in spring ball and in fall camp. And of course, he was a starter in 2024, and I thought did really well and continued to get better as the season went on. But man, when you saw what he was able to do, one of the best seasons by an ASU corner ever. The metrics, the eye test, whatever measure you want to put Keith Abney up against, he passed with flying colors. All the awards, all conference honors. A few publications and outlets have him as an All-American. Now he's in that day 2, fringe day 1, perhaps the NFL draft conversation. A guy who gave everything as one of those kind of foundational members coming to ASU a few years ago when the outlook was bleak, and through his hard work and dedication and leadership, he's leaving this program in a much better place than he found it. So for me, just, there's obviously a number of guys on this team that really kind of, made 2025 kind of one of their statement years. But I think nobody made a louder statement given to where they were last year than Keith Abney. Joe, your assistant coach of the year.
I've said his name many times here in this discussion. I've said his name many times over the course of the season. someone I have the utmost respect for as a human being and as a football coach, someone that helped weather the storm for Arizona State a few years ago. And that's something that fans will never, ever forget. And for my money, I will die on the hill that he's the best running back coach in America. And this year, you saw the explosion of Cam Scatterboot. Now you saw them have to pivot with Kyson Brown being hurt. Raleek Brown goes for over 1,000 yards. You got all their running backs getting involved. Sean Aguano, for me, takes that home with ease.
For me, I'm going Brian Carrington. I just, kind of dovetailing off the talk about Keith Abney and his development. But I thought, especially with kind of the up and down play of on the other side of Javen Robinson, you saw Rodney Bimmage really become a key contributor as a depth guy and a future starter. Also, his impact off the field, and as a recruiter, as a guy who's developing and these players that Texas Tempe pipeline. A lot of this success over the last 2 years is because of the players and the connections that Brian Carrington was able to do. And, as we talked about on the On Time Down episode on Friday, his elevation to his, assistant head coach and really having even more of a say in terms of just shaping this roster and the personnel. He's a rising star. He's going to be a future head coach somewhere in the not too distant future. But ASU is very fortunate to have him. So I thought, based on what we saw, Brian Carrington is very much, worthy of this award. Of course, Sean Aguano, what he was able to do. AJ Cooper with the linebackers as well. I mean, the ASU staff has been really excellent and obviously very crucial that the staff continuity that they've had in recent years has played a role in that success. All right, now we're in the home stretch, the big three. Joe, your pick for Defensive Player of the Year.
Well, you just talked about him, and I just cannot be more impressed with the season that Keith Abney had. Very possibly the best season by a cornerback at ASU that I've ever seen in the 30 or so years I've been watching this program. Just a guy that made plays when he needed them. Had an incredible interception to lock in a game. He's someone that was recovering fumbles, not afraid to hit, incredible in coverage, someone that, depending on what mock drafts you follow, as you talked about, maybe a day two, could possibly even be a first-round pick. And that added part of him being one of the few guys on this roster, even still, that started at ASU, finished at ASU. The likes of like a CJ Fight joining that category as well. So all things considered, you just love to see it. And I don't think Abney was even that big time of a recruit. Might be like a 2-star if I'm not mistaken. I'd have to go back and see. But just someone that has just really exceeded the expectations. There's some good defenders that ASU had. Those linebackers were good, and I second that AJ Cooper really could have been in consideration for our assistant coach of the year. But for me, Abney was just that lockdown guy virtually all the time. Just a huge, huge piece of the puzzle, and just a great story. He just got better each year and peaked at the right time. First team all conference as a junior. He'll be playing on Sundays this coming season, so he did everything that he needed to do as a Sun Devil.
I just talked about him a moment ago. You just talked about him a second ago. Keith Abney is my pick as well. Just sensational. So I'll just move on to the Offensive Player of the Year. Now, this is a little complicated, I think, just because of injuries. But in the end, I just ultimately can't ignore the brilliance that was Jordan Tyson when he was able to go out there, even missing several games as he did with that hamstring injury. Still a third-team AP All-American. A guy that was on a record pace before those injuries issues really kind of hit him a little bit. But, this is a program that has had so many amazing, productive, all-time type of wide receivers. And he, I think, in his brief time last year and this year has really, I think, got entered in that conversation. It's kind of unfortunate. He's been end of the last couple of years with injuries, but man, when he's been on the field, just absolute electricity.
Yeah, and I've gone back and forth because there is some process of elimination. You can't go Levitt, and that's not a sour grapes bitterness thing because he's leaving for a payday. It's just that he was banged up, and as we talked about, he just did not take steps forward that he was expected to. I was thinking about going Raleek Brown. He had a great season. Not like boom or bust, but he had a handful of games. He had several games that were in like that 50, 60 rushing yards, and that's not a bad total. But then he had a few, especially obviously that Colorado game that really weighed things in his favor, got him over that 1,000-yard mark. But I will go with Jordan Tyson. the catch that he had against TCU, that one you talked about against Texas Tech, even that was a 2-point conversion, I think, against was it against Baylor that he had that really nice swing? Again, just individual plays, but just series of dominance, just showing that he is such a skilled wide receiver and putting himself in a position to be, a lock as a first round pick, possibly inside the top 10. So just an incredible season, even if it didn't reach its full conclusion, even if he missed time, even if he wasn't, part of the Biletnikoff award. But a great deal of respect given to him by the Big 12 by still being a first team all conference honors recipient. So it was between him and Raleek Brown for me, but he was just a dominant player when he was in there. You just always had to account for him. And there were plays that he made that not a lot of other guys can make. And had he not made them, ASU's record would be a different thing than it turned out to be.
All right, our final award, and I think this is going to be interesting because my pick somebody that we haven't mentioned yet. So I'm really curious to where you went with this because this, obviously in a season like this can take a number of different forms. Joe, who's your pick for MVP of 2025?
I got to go with the guy that used part of his body to win some games for ASU. There were too many players that were a little either streaky or injured or things like that. If Jesus Gomez isn't on this roster, if you have maybe the kickers that you're dealing with last year, ASU probably would have been like 6-6, maybe 5-7. They may not even go to a bowl game. So my team MVP, again, there does have to be some process of elimination because other guys either, being hurt or whatever the case may be. But he was, to me, the most valuable player on the team.
Oh, interesting. Okay. My team MVP, linebacker Keyshawn Elliott. ASU's defense kept this team afloat in 2025. The offense, for all the hype and the expectations that the nation gave, we gave, and had high expectations for that unit to score 30, 35, 40 points a game, it never materialized. Most of the games on the schedule were rock fights, 27, 24. I mean, how many times that score or something similar happened. And ASU's defense, week in, week out, with that one outlier against Utah, kept the Sun Devils in games and in many cases won the games. And the man at the center of that defense, wearing the green dot, being the quarterback of that defense, putting up huge numbers in every column of the stat sheet, just making a sideline to sideline tackles, leading the team in sacks, tackles for loss, just being an instrumental part and one of the team's heart and soul type of leaders. Keyshawn Elliott, I think, was just obviously, we raved about the linebacker group at length. Jordan Crook had a tremendous year. But I think for me, just kind of given the totality of the body of work, his role within the scheme of ASU's best part of the team and best phase of the game, Keyshawn Elliott is my 2025 most valuable Sun Devil. So
he had a great bounce back year, and that 24 was bad in any stretch at all. Like he had a solid year, but yeah, Keyshawn Elliott was on top of everything this year, and that's a great pick. And that's one that, again, the weirdness of this season and how some players were streaky and there were a lot of injuries. It's just not that easy to predict. There are a lot of different ways you can look back on this season and identify maybe, what's more valuable than the other, or just a personal perception of value. And that's why we had like some similarities, but some differences. That's kind of in this season in a nutshell, to where there was good, there was bad, there was weird. It's really hard to label this season, and that trickles down to some of the players and their accomplishments too.
Yeah, and I think in past years, probably most of the past years, we've kind of collaborated before and kind of had some unified picks. I think we went in this year kind of completely cold and blind. Like we knew the categories, but we did not share the info. So it was interesting to see the expected overlap, but some of the interesting diversions, and because this was just a weird year, and I think there's some years it's just like very clearly Rachaad White definitely the pick, the man, but here I think. So obviously, I think that puts a nice little cap on the 2025 season, and I think that'll do it for this episode of Speak of the Devils. A lot going on, so you definitely want to follow us on social media. You can follow the show on Twitter at SOTD Podcast, on Instagram at Speak of the Devils. Subscribe on YouTube, follow us on Facebook, and give me a follow on all things social media at BDenny29.
And you can follow me at Joe Healy42. And of course, please give a lot of love to our incredible sponsors. Follow them, patronize them, give them a reasonable amount of your money and your time. Of course, that list is Burrito Express, Cactus Sports, DevilsDigest.com. You got to be in the huddle now during the transfer portal. Come on now. Jones Auto Group, Nice Pest Company, Sundeville Family Charities, and More Lending, LLC branch NMLS number 2732146. PJ Saturno, NMLS number 257912.
Once you're done supporting all of those amazing sponsors, make sure you drop us a 5-star review on the podcast platform of your choice. We'll be back next week as we track week 2 of the transfer portal madness.